She tried to laugh it off, that trembling in her voice when our hands brushed, but her eyes betrayed her. It wasn't a game anymore. It was a quiet storm building between us, one she'd spent years pretending she was immune to, until now. It started with something as ordinary as helping my friend's mom carry groceries from the car. I'd done it a dozen times before, but that day felt different, not because of what we said, but because of what lingered in the silence between us. The afternoon light spilled across her driveway, painting soft gold over her hair as she turned to thank me. Her smile was polite, practiced, yet there was a flicker behind it, a warmth she didn't quite hide fast enough. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh laundry, familiar, comforting. She moved with quiet grace, setting things in place with the ease of someone who had built her world around small routines. I caught myself watching her, the way her wrist turned as she poured tea, the faint line of concentration between her brows. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. "You don't have to help with everything," she said lightly, her tone carrying that gentle authority only she could manage. "I don't mind," I replied. "I like being useful here." That made her pause. For a heartbeat, she looked at me differently, like she was weighing something she couldn't quite name. Then she smiled again, smaller this time. "You always were a good boy," she murmured, but her voice faltered ever so slightly on boy, as if the word didn't quite fit anymore. When she handed me my cup, her fingers brushed mine. It was nothing, a passing touch, yet it left a trace that refused to fade. I saw her draw in a slow breath, steadying herself before pretending to tidy the counter. I should have looked away, but I didn't. There was a softness in her, an unspoken ache that matched something I hadn't realized was in me too. We talked about simple things, her garden, my new job, her son's endless travels. But beneath every word, there was a hum of tension neither of us wanted to name. Her laughter came easily, but her eyes kept wandering, toward me, then away, as though afraid of being caught by her own heart. When I stood to leave, she walked me to the door. The air between us felt charged, like the moment before a summer storm. She hesitated, her hand hovering near my arm before pulling back. "Drive safe," she said, her tone softer now, her smile almost sad. Outside, I could still feel the ghost of her touch, the warmth of her nearness lingering on my skin. I didn't know what it meant, not yet. But something had shifted, quietly, irrevocably. And as I glanced back through the window, I saw her standing there, one hand pressed lightly against her chest, eyes closed as if steadying her breath. That was the moment I knew, whatever this was, it wasn't just in my head. Something real had begun to stir. For a few days I stayed away. Partly out of respect, partly because I didn't trust what I'd started to feel. But avoiding her only made the thoughts sharper, the way her voice softened when she spoke to me, the tremor in her breath when our hands had brushed. It replayed in my mind at the most ordinary times, like a song I couldn't turn off. When I finally saw her again, it wasn't planned. I dropped by to return a jacket I'd borrowed from her son. She opened the door herself, hair loosely tied, a faint trace of surprise flickering in her eyes before she smiled. "You could have just texted," she said, leaning against the frame, arms crossed, casual, but guarded. "I was passing by," I lied. She knew it, too. Her lips curved, not in mockery, but in quiet understanding. Inside, the house felt different. The air seemed heavier, the silence more deliberate. She moved around the living room with that same easy grace, but something in her energy was changed, softer, but more careful, as if she'd rehearsed being unaffected. I sat on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, though I couldn't stop watching her reflection in the mirror by the wall. She caught my gaze there. For a second, either of us looked away. Her breath hitched, and she turned sharply toward the window. "You shouldn't look at people like that," she said quietly. "Like what?" "Like you mean it." The words landed between us like an open secret. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because she was right, I did mean it. She sat across from me, trying to change the subject, asking about work, my plans, the weather, anything safe. but her eyes betrayed her calm. They softened every time our conversations slipped towards something personal, something real. At one point I leaned forward to set my cup down, and her knee brushed mine. It was a small, accidental touch, but it lingered like a question neither of us dared to ask. Her voice grew quieter after that, her laughter shorter, almost nervous. When I stood to leave again, she walked me to the door, as she always did. Only this time, when I thanked her, she didn't immediately step back. Her hand hovered near my sleeve, trembling slightly before she let it fall away. "You make it hard to remember what's appropriate," she whispered, her eyes searching mine. I wanted to say something, anything, but every word felt too heavy, too dangerous. So I just nodded and stepped outside, letting the night air cool the warmth that had built between us. Behind me, the door closed softly, but I could still feel her there, the quiet pull, the distance that no longer felt like safety. In that silence, I realized it wasn't about what we said or did. It was about everything we were trying not to do, and how impossible that was becoming. A week passed, and in that silence, something fragile began to bloom. Every day I thought about her, the tone of her voice, the subtle pause before she smiled, the way she carried herself as if she was trying not to feel too much. I kept telling myself it would fade. It didn't. If anything, it deepened. Then came the evening she called. Her voice on the phone was soft but steady. "Could you come by? The garden lights stopped working, and I can't figure them out." It sounded harmless, practical, even. But there was a hesitation behind her words, a quiet pulse I couldn't ignore. When I arrived, the sun had just set, leaving the backyard drenched in a soft, amber glow. She was waiting outside, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back, her skin glimmering faintly beneath the porch light. "You didn't have to rush," she said, but there was relief in her tone, like she had hoped I would. I knelt beside the tangled wires, pretending to focus on fixing them, but she stayed close. Too close. The scent of her perfume, something warm and floral, drifted through the air, stirring everything I'd tried to bury. I could feel her gaze on me, steady and unguarded. When I looked up, she was already watching. "You've grown into someone different," she murmured, almost to herself. "It's strange, seeing you like this." "Different how?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. She exhaled slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "It's not something I should say." There was a silence, the kind that makes the air hum. I stood, and for a moment, we were inches apart. The soft breeze carried the faint sound of crickets, the world fading into background noise. Her eyes lifted to meet mine. "Do you realize what you're doing to me?" she asked suddenly, her voice trembling just enough to reveal everything she'd been hiding. It wasn't anger. It wasn't accusation. It was a confession wrapped in restraint, a quiet surrender from a woman who had fought too long to stay composed. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Words would have broken the spell, and this fragile truth between us, felt too sacred to name aloud. Her hand rose slightly, as if drawn by instinct, before she caught herself and turned away. "I'm sorry," she whispered, shaking her head. "That was out of line." But I saw it, the shimmer in her eyes, the battle between guilt and longing. When the lights flickered back on, the garden glowed softly around us, golden and serene. She smiled faintly, pretending to admire them, but her hands were trembling. As I left that night, I didn't just hear her words echoing in my mind. "Do you realize what you're doing to me?" I felt them. Every syllable, every pause, sinking deep into the quiet corners of my heart. After that night in the garden, we didn't talk for a while. Maybe we were both afraid of what might spill out if we did. The world went on as usual. I saw her son, ran errands, went to work, but everything felt tinted by that one moment when she looked at me and asked that impossible question. "Do you realize what you're doing to me?" Her voice replayed in quiet places, when I brewed coffee in the morning, when I drove past her street. It wasn't a memory I could shut out, it had a life of its own, pulsing beneath every routine moment. Eventually, life found a reason to bring us face to face again. She texted about a family dinner she was hosting, casual and polite. You should come. It would mean a lot. I told myself it was nothing, a friendly gesture. But when I arrived, the first thing I noticed wasn't the laughter in the living room or the smell of roasted herbs in the air, it was her. Standing by the kitchen counter, elegant as ever, but her composure seemed to tremble at the edges. Glad you came, she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes, they gave her away. We were careful that evening. Every exchange was layered, polite words masking deeper thoughts. When she handed me a plate, her fingers brushed mine for the briefest second, a contact so fleeting that anyone watching wouldn't notice. But to me, it felt like a full conversation, a reminder of everything we weren't saying. Later, after the guests drifted off to the living room, I found her alone in the kitchen. She was wiping the counter, though it didn't need cleaning. Her movements were restless, distracted. You don't have to do that, I said softly. She glanced at me, then looked down. It's easier to keep my hands busy, she murmured. I stepped closer, not enough to invade her space, just enough for her to feel the warmth of my presence. She stilled. Her breathing changed. I didn't mean to make things complicated, I said. That night, don't, she interrupted, her voice trembling. Please don't apologize for something that felt. She trailed off, biting her lip, searching for a safer word. Real. The silence that followed was unbearable and beautiful all at once. The faint hum of conversation from the other room barely reached us. It felt like the world had paused to listen. When she finally looked up, her eyes were glistening, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. Whatever this is, she whispered, it can't be what it wants to be. I nodded, but I didn't move away. Because we both knew, wanting and allowing weren't the same thing. And yet, as her hand brushed mine again, slow and deliberate this time, I realized that no matter how hard we tried to create distance, our hearts kept finding their way back into the same quiet space, the space between what we feel and what we dare to say. Rain had been falling all evening, slow, steady, and rhythmic, like a heartbeat against the windows. I hadn't planned to see her that night, but life, it seemed, was done with pretending. Her son had left town again, and she texted to ask if I could help move a few boxes from the garage before the weather ruined them. It sounded simple enough. Ordinary. But my chest tightened as I typed on my way. When I arrived, the air felt heavy with something more than rain. The house was dim, lit by the soft glow of a few lamps. She opened the door wearing a loose sweater, her hair slightly damp from stepping outside earlier. I didn't expect you so fast, she said, her voice carrying that familiar blend of warmth and restraint. Didn't want the rain to get worse, I replied, trying to sound casual, though my pulse betrayed me. We worked in silence for a while, lifting boxes, shifting things, laughing quietly when one toppled open to reveal old family photos. She knelt beside them, brushing dust from a picture of her son and his father. Her smile faltered for a moment. I crouched next to her, watching the faint tremor of her hands. Do you ever miss it? I asked gently. She looked at me, eyes distant. The noise of it all, yes. The feeling of being seen, not so much. Her honesty caught me off guard. It wasn't bitterness, just truth, spoken softly after too long in silence. I reached out without thinking, my hand resting lightly over hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers turned beneath mine, meeting my touch with quiet intent. I shouldn't, she whispered, eyes lowering to where our hands met. I know, I said. But you are. For a long moment, we stayed like that, two people suspended between right and real. The rain outside grew louder, wrapping the house in a cocoon of sound. Her breathing slowed. I could feel the warmth of it on my skin. Finally, she stood, pulling her hand away as if reminding herself of all the reasons she should. You should go before it gets late, she murmured, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. I nodded, but something in me refused to move. If I leave now, I said quietly, I'll spend the whole night thinking about what you didn't say. That stopped her. She turned, eyes shining in the dim light. You already know what I didn't say, she replied. And she was right. I did. Still, words have power, even when left unspoken. So I stepped forward, close enough for her to feel that I wasn't asking, just being. Her hand lifted, barely touching my chest, a whisper of warmth that said everything neither of us could voice. When I finally walked into the rain, I carried her touch with me, light, trembling, unforgettable. And for the first time, I understood what she meant when she said I didn't realize what I was doing to her. Because now, she was doing the same thing to me. The rain had stopped by morning, but it left the world washed clean, glistening under a pale gray sky. I hadn't heard from her since that night in the garage, no texts, no calls. I told myself to let it go, to give her the space she clearly needed. But the quiet became unbearable. Every memory of her felt unfinished, like a line of poetry left hanging in midair. 3 days later she called. Her voice was calm, but there was something fragile beneath it. "Can you stop by?" she asked. "There's something I need to say." When I arrived, she was sitting in the living room, the morning light falling gently across her face. The air smelled of coffee and rain-soaked earth. She looked tired, as though she hadn't slept much. "Thank you for coming," she said, motioning for me to sit. I did, across from her, close enough to feel her presence but far enough to honor her need for space. "I've been thinking a lot," she began. "About us. About what's been happening." Her voice wavered on us, as if the word itself was both terrifying and inevitable. "I'm old enough to know better," she continued, smiling faintly but without humor. "And yet here I am, feeling things I thought were long behind me." I didn't interrupt. I just listened, the way she always listened to me. She folded her hands in her lap, her eyes lowering. "You make me feel seen again," she said softly. "And that's dangerous, because I stopped letting myself be seen a long time ago. I learned to live quietly, safely. But you," she paused, her throat tightening, "you make me forget to be careful." I felt something shift in the air then, not passion, but release. She wasn't confessing to a secret anymore, she was setting it free. I moved closer slowly, until I was sitting beside her. She didn't look at me right away. But when she did, her eyes were glistening, not with regret, but with something gentler, braver. "I don't want to ruin your peace," she whispered. "You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you." "I'm not looking for an escape," I said quietly. "I'm looking for something real. And I think you are, too." Her breath trembled as she exhaled, and then, with a kind of quiet surrender, she reached for my hand. Her fingers slipped into mine, hesitant at first, then firm. For a long time, we sat like that, no grand declarations, no promises, just the honest stillness of two hearts that finally stopped pretending. She leaned slightly, her shoulder brushing mine, her head resting there for a brief, perfect moment. "I don't know where this goes," she murmured. "Neither do I," I admitted. "But it feels right, doesn't it?" Her smile was soft, weary, and real. "Yes," she said. "For the first time in a long while, it feels right." And in that fragile peace, she finally let herself feel, not as someone's mother, not as someone holding back, but as a woman, fully present, and finally unafraid. Autumn crept in gently that year, tinting the world in amber and gold. The air carried that crisp scent of change, leaves falling, afternoons softening into early twilight. Weeks had passed since that morning she'd let herself lean against me, and though nothing had been spoken aloud since, everything between us had changed. We existed in a quieter rhythm now, one built not on longing or secrecy, but on an unspoken understanding that what we shared was real, however delicate. She started inviting me over more often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes to help around the garden. Simple things. But it wasn't the coffee or the chores that mattered. It was the way her eyes softened when she saw me at the door, the way her laughter came easier now. There was peace in her again, the kind that comes after a storm has finally passed. One late afternoon, we sat on the porch together, watching the last of the leaves drift across the yard. The sky was brushed with the faint orange of sunset, and the air was cool enough that she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Without a word, she offered me a corner of it, and I moved closer until our shoulders touched beneath the same fabric. "I used to hate this season," she said quietly. "It always felt like an ending." "And now?" I asked. She smiled faintly, her gaze on the horizon. "Now it feels like a pause, like the world taking a deep breath before beginning again." I turned slightly, studying her profile in the golden light. She looked peaceful, not the forced composure she once wore, but something honest and alive. Her hand rested on the armrest between us, palm open, waiting. I placed my hand over hers. She didn't flinch this time, she simply intertwined our fingers, her thumb brushing gently against my skin. "This, whatever it is," she said softly, "it can't be about running away from anything. It has to be about being present. About choosing to be kind, even to ourselves." "I think that's what we've been doing," I said. "Learning to be kind to the parts of us that still want to feel." Her eyes met mine then, steady, luminous. "You've changed me," she whispered. I shook my head. "No. You just remembered who you were." She laughed quietly, leaning her head against my shoulder. The world around us was still, the faint rustle of leaves, the warmth of shared breath in the cool air. It wasn't dramatic or forbidden anymore. It was human, two people finding something sacred in the simple act of being seen, understood, and gently held. As the sky deepened into dusk, she whispered, "Do you realize what you're doing to me?" This time I smiled. "Maybe," I said softly. "But I think you're doing the same to me." She didn't answer, she just stayed close, her hand resting over my heart, steady and sure. And in that quiet, where words no longer mattered, it felt like forever, not the loud, burning kind, but the quiet kind that lives in shared silences, gentle glances, and the certainty of being home.